Okay, okay, members. Okay, members, you're welcome. My name is Ssebuyungo Wilber Kivekayunga. In this session, I'm going to share with you about the great man theory of leadership. Just to have a little overview of the great man theory of leadership, the theory was proposed by Thomas Carrier in the 1911. That is according to the Google search engines, and compared with an article by Rosette. This theory suggests that certain individuals are great people, they are great men, and therefore they possess inherent and innate qualities made within them. So these qualities that are inherent means they acquire them at the time they are born and during pregnancy of an infant. That infant can be a great man, and the word man is translated to mean female and male in this context. So that means that uh, uh, the leaders we have in our communities and organization, some of them can be born other than being trained or mentored by anybody or any forces of the environment. So leaders are developed. These great leaders are not, according to this theory, the leaders are not developed through experience or any form of training. So they are not brought up by training. You cannot train this leader, but instead, these leaders are born. Their abilities are born. So, leaders' capabilities are propelled by their inherent abilities other than acquired skills or any circumstances. We have here, according to an article by John Fora, mentioned an example of Mahatma Gandhi, an Indian leader, the propeller of the non-violence system of governance, where if we are to take action about dissatisfactions of any form of leadership or within families, we do not need to use violent measures. Mahatma Gandhi's proposal of leadership and his greatness in leadership could not be traced through a university or mentorship from any leader, but instead he was found to be a leader. And this tells us that his determination, unwavering morals, and being a distinguished leader could have been born. And according to the great man's theory, his abilities as Mahatma Gandhi were actually born. And if we looked at here a brief oversight, a brief insight of Mahatma Gandhi, we could see that his ambitions and his strategies in military were not being taught anywhere in the communities at that time, but actually he innovated them, invented them, and made them to be. That tells us that we could not ask Mahatma Gandhi where his strategies were studied, or ask him where he studied all those military strategies and how he studied leadership or education, and all that he narrated as strategies of developing economies in India. All those strategies could not be traced in books, and even the people who raised him were not aware of them, but he so became. So he led the French Revolution, and all the military powers, authorities, and influence that he had could not be traced elsewhere. But this theory suggests that all those skills and his abilities were actually acquired at the time of birth, other than by environmental factors which we experience after birth. So in here, we also have some other examples of leaders. We can enumerate them, and much more. These we could not fix them in the same template. Actually, even leaders who are not prominent in and it could be on Google or are known worldwide, could be in a home, could be on a village, or they could be in an organization, and therefore those leaders can also be associated to the great man's theory, and their abilities can be explained by the great man theory. Leaders like Nelson Mandela, who lived in a time where the South Africa was under the influence of perpetrators who came and invaded South Africa, took over power and and authority from people, and started leading South Africa to exploitation. So he came up from nowhere, and regardless of his family background, he raised up, and regardless of his education, he raised up and stood against the apartheid. And therefore, Nelson Mandela can be a qualifying candidate of the great man's theory. And similarly, Martin Luther King and Martin Luther Jr. Was seen to live in the United States and in a situation which was actually influenced by the white supremacy, and therefore, after seeing that the blacks were being mistreated and treated as slaves, to his mind, which mind we could not trace it still through education or mentorship, which we could associate to being a mind that is born and an attitude that is born, stood boldly and went against the segregation and the racial discriminations in the United States. Such leaders are prominent in our communities, and therefore, when these leaders stand up and influence people towards a particular direction or give instructions, they should be listened to and should not be asked where they studied, what, or who told them to say what they are saying, or where they read what they are saying. But instead, they should be listened to and followed. According to the great man theory, these are great men who were born other than uh, uh, being made by human initiatives. So they are inherently having those leadership traits, those characters, and therefore the ability to influence is particularly born. What does this theory actually train us as managers and leaders who are listening to this session? This tells us that we cannot entirely determine who a leader is, or what the leader should do, or what the leader should be. That is already predetermined, and these people are born with all those establishments of what they are, who they are, and what they should be. And therefore, human beings, as people, we have little inputs on on altering what this person should be and how he should conduct himself or herself, just in case is a female. Because the word man's theory, great man's theory, can also be traced and spread, expounded to cover women. So the strength of leaders is secreted in the birthrights other than being produced by human actions. We also see that most people have leadership abilities, but not all are leaders. Because some people, according to this theory, some people may be born without abilities to lead, and therefore others are born with those abilities. And therefore, when they sit in positions, authority, and influence, and they are not born to have those traits, they cannot actually cause leadership to be effective. Yet others can actually uh, uh, create a greater influence and cause community development through their leadership. And that is because of their uh, uh, being born leaders. So, by personal identity, people identifying who they are and the trail of their birthrights, they can actually recognize the leadership abilities inside them. And one can recognize the leadership abilities secreted inside him or herself, so that the inspiration and influence is uh, uh, is attached to uh, uh, to birth, other than human external human actions. However, scholars such as Powell of 2022 argue, and other scholars argue against this the assertions of this great man's theory. They say that the theory lacks empirical evidence to prove that actually leaders are born, not made. Because we see leaders in practice, we cannot trace inside them to see whether these traits were born, or actually they acquired them through the people or through the families they have lived, or the communities they have been, or the institutions they have uh, uh, they have worked in or stayed. They also argue that the theory ignores external factors, these external environmental factors which can contribute to a leader's ability to perform and impact. So if one concentrated on only thinking that leaders are great men who are born other than created, we can ignore people building people and mentoring them into being great leaders by a hypothesis that leaders are already leaders. The leaders are already leaders, so they do not need to have an external touch or refinement or creation. They also discuss that the theory discourages developing new leaders from those who are born. So leaders who are in schools, or those children who are in schools and communities, if we continue theorizing that leaders are born, then we shall ignore those who are in schools and those who are in communities, ignoring to nurture them or to mentor them into leaders, thinking that by naturality they will be leaders and they will be great leaders. And they will be great leaders. So uh, it challenges these scholars challenge the assertions. However, it also fails to account for failures in leadership. The theories the theory of the great man does not explicitly discuss for us why the great leaders fail. We could maybe in Uganda we can look at the prominent figure of Idi Amin Dada and ask ourselves, he emerged out of no much education and took over leadership, and his impact to the community could be evident till today. Possibly during his leadership, that's when Kampala Serena Hotel was constructed as a hotel by the government and other institutions that can be seen. However, he could also be attributed to his leadership could also be attributed to violence, and that resulted into a crisis. Others say his contribution to community was good because he explicitly expelled the Indians from Uganda. However, even the great leaders have failure. If they are born leaders, then why to fail in some instances or some aspects? Could we say because they are humans so they fail? Then why should they fail? Yet uh, um, uh, they are greatly endowed with those characters and traits acquired at birth. Possibly they would have been fully, fully successful. That is according to John Locke of 2022. So, members, I would like to thank you for listening to me. I have spent some 18 minutes for this, and I'll, at posting this presentation, I will also share with you the references so that you can follow through the assertions and arguments against to and against the great man theory. Thank you, members.